Hi friends, welcome back to the channel, Ozarks Traditional. Want to welcome you back again to episode 2 of our series, Traditional Archery, Beginner to Bowhunter. What we'll be covering today is the basics of aiming the arrow at the target. I'm going to go through several different methods. I just demonstrated a method called instinctive shooting, which you saw me if you caught episode 1 of this series, which I did a series from traditional practical hunting ranges using instinctive aiming, which is the method that I have chosen. But today I'm going to go through other methods that may appeal to you, what each one of these was, and then at the end of it I'll give you a synopsis of why I chose to go with instinctive aiming method. I'm going to have to move my cat out of the way over there before she gets in the middle of this. But I'm going to go retrieve these arrows and take you up and show you a little bit on the target of what we're going to be shooting at. So our target face was simply made from a template that if you watched episode 1, it showed how Gracie and I put this target face on this bale. But I neglected to give you any dimensions. Inside to inside in the white ring is 9 inches. The target dot itself is 2.5 inches. So basically what we're doing when we hit this target from our known distances, if we're anywhere inside of the white circle using the inner bullseye as our aiming point, we're pie plating it at hunting distances. And for the best absolute positive results that we can get, we want it as close to the bullseye as we can get. So we're going to step back up and do all of our shooting this week from 15 yards as I'm demonstrating a couple of different methods of aiming the bow and arrow. So I'll set us back up at 15 yards, be right back with you. So here we are set back up at 15 yards from our target face. I demonstrated the instinctive archery, and now I want to show you another method of aiming called gap shooting. Let me try to explain it before I start. Gap shooting is simply a method of using the tip of the arrow to point at a particular spot on the target that allows you to hit your intended point of impact. So it's the gap is the point of aim and the point of impact. What I mean by that, from here with archery, the relationship of the arrow to the eye is a fair distance on there. So to aim straight at the target, the eye would have to be directly behind the nock point. Since the eye is above the nock point, there's an angle of deflection to the arrow. So your line of sight is above the flight of the arrow that goes through. Hence, when you're using the gap method, you'll actually have to point the tip of the arrow at a certain distance below the target face. Now, this can be accomplished with either a split finger or 3 under. More people in woodland settings will opt for a 3 under grip on the string. The split works just fine, but it takes the distance between eye and arrow nock further apart. So it makes the gap further apart. The closer you can get the arrow to line up with your eye, the smaller your gap is going to be. Now, for people that would hunt longer distances or for 3D shooting, may want to have a further gap to shoot at longer distances. There's also called what is a point on distance, where whatever your method of shooting is, a certain distance will allow the point of the arrow to be placed on the intended point of impact, and that is your point on distance. For a split finger shooter, and my setup with my arrow speed and my arrow weight, that's a little over 40 yards. For 3D shooting, maybe you would want something like that. For Western shooting, maybe you would want something like that. For closer ranges in woodland settings, most people would opt for a shorter point on distance. The 3 under method of shooting will allow that, because using the same anchor point, you will have your arrow closer to your eye. In this instance, I have a small white dot, which is 10 inches below the center of the bullseye on this target. So I'm going to go with a 3 under addressing of the string, put the tip of my arrow on that spot 10 inches below what the bullseye is, and we'll see where we end up. That height is just about right. I was a little off to the left. So I'm about 2 inches above the target with each of those at 15 yards. So I'm going to retrieve those arrows. I will try for a 12-inch gap and see where those arrows land. So I'm going to be placing the tip of the arrow on the target about 2 inches more below that little white dot with a 3 under string. And that looks like the mark. Got 2 arrows almost touching in the bullseye. So you may ask, Tandy, why don't you use this all the time? I'll get to that later on in the episode. Right now, I want to tell you that if target archery or 3D tournaments are your main focus, then this would be a method that you would definitely want to consider over instinctive aiming. You can be much more accurate with much less practice. And when I say much less practice, this is my first time trying this method. I've got arrows touching on the edge of the bullseye. You'll get better results much quicker. Well, why didn't I choose that method? Again, I'll touch on that after we touch on a few more of the possibilities. Now, that's not the only. Gap shooting is not the only one. If you want to reduce your point on each time, remember I said that you want to get the point of the arrow on where you want the target to be. That could be accomplished. I'll take one of my broadheads for a minute just for demonstration purposes. You reduce, by going 3 under, you have reduced the gap to your eye by a finger and a nock width. So from here to here, that raises up the back end of this arrow to be more in line with the eye. To reduce that even more, you could use a system called string walking. Now, string walking is seldom accomplished with a glove. Almost always a tab is used. I will show pictures of the tab that is used with string walking and give you an idea of why that is. The tabs will have markings, whether it be pieces of thread or dedicated rule that is sewn into the tab that allows you precise measurements where at a certain yardage, if you want to shoot at 20 yards, if you want to shoot at 23 yards, if it's 30 yards, what have you, what you would do is put the tab to bump your nock. Then you would put your thumbnail on where that mark is that you've got on your tab. Then you would slide down the top of your tab to get to that, and then you've created more of a gap. So then when you pull back to your same anchor point, your arrow is even more in line with the target. So what string walking does is it changes the launch angle of your arrow to go to the target. So you can have that at any yardage that you want just by shooting the yardages, mark them on your tab, and be able to go down to each one. And then instead of having to judge 12 inches below a target to hit the target, your point on is dead on each time. Oh, well, that sounds great, you say. Yes and no. Again, for target archery or for 3D archery, that's perfect, as long as you can judge the yardage very well. If you know that a target is 21 yards, then you can go to your 20-yard mark, count down maybe just a couple more threads, go into that spot, dial it dead on. However, now I'm going to get to the point that explains a little more why I use instinctive rather than this aiming method. Things happen rapidly in a hunting situation. Deer have their own minds. They come walking in on their schedule, not yours. They don't stop exactly where you want. So if they're coming back in, you have a spot out there, you've moved your crawl down to what that yardage is, but the deer doesn't stop and you can't get him to stop and he walks through that spot, then all of a sudden you're having to look down to readjust and move around again. Not conducive to a hunting situation. Therein comes another method of shooting, and this one I saw demonstrated by Matt Zerzak of the Push Archery. And if you guys want a lot of great information on traditional archery, I highly recommend you stop by the Push Archery and check out their website as well as their YouTube. They've got fantastic explanations on each of these aiming and shooting methods in traditional archery. Fantastic resource. The solution to this is known as a fixed crawl. So what you do in a fixed crawl is, through trial and error, you go back to a spot, say 25 yards, 30 yards. 25 would be better if you could. Pick a 25-yard mark where your point on is dead on at that point. As I demonstrated in episode 1, my bow shoots pretty flat out to 20 yards. At 25 yards, I start to get an 8 to 10 inch drop in my arrow. So if you've got a point on at 25, then you can use that point on. It's a combination of gap shooting and string walking. You could pick a point, say 6 inches, 8 inches below your intended point of impact to aim. So if a deer's coming in a vital zone, if you're going for a mid-lung shot, it's basically the bottom of the chest. You put your point on the tip of the arrow at the bottom of the chest, and then you'll be in the kill zone of a white-tailed deer. And then and that happens anywhere between 10 and 20 yards. If he is a little further, then at 25 yards, you've got your point on for that. Just put point on what you want to hit, take your shot. Seems to be a quick method to go with it. Now, if that's a great method, which I think that it is, why don't I use it? It's the way my eyes and my brain works. I have a little trouble. It takes me longer to aim with this because the focus of my eyes does not allow me to focus on the target and the spot that I want to hit, as well as the tip of the arrow. When I'm looking at the spot I want to hit, the tip of the arrow is extremely fuzzy, extremely blurry. So that's part of my own reasoning to go into it. Another on top of that is that when the animal is moving in and when I'm getting ready to take the shot, I want all of my focus to be on that point, on that spot that I want to shoot. I don't want to be trying to focus on the spot that my point of impact that I want to hit, and then have to worry about moving the tip of my arrow somewhere else to achieve that. That's a personal preference. It's one that if you decide to go along in with this, that's a decision that you'll have to make for yourself. But that is the reason that I've made the decision, and where I set my stands, where I put them in, I try to focus my location where I'll have a 15-yard shot. If he's a little bit further, okay, I've still got the 20 yards where my setup is still pretty flat. From 10 to 20 yards, I may be an inch or two high on the low end. At 20 yards, I may be an inch or two low at the high end, but it's pretty flat out to that distance. That's why most of the bow hunters that you'll see who use the instinctive method limit their shots to inside 20 yards, some inside 15 yards, where they know that they are proficient and that their setup is going to allow them to pick their spot, take their shot to cleanly harvest the quarry that they're after. So that's my reasoning to choose the instinctive style of shooting. It takes a lot longer to master it because even though you use the term instinctive, it is really learned repetitiveness. So from known yardages, I have shot hundreds of times from 10 yards, from 15, from 20, out to 25. I shoot hundreds of times there so that I have developed the muscle memory, the eye-hand coordination to be able to let my brain do the computations and the calculations. When I see it, it's already fixed in my mind where I need to be, what sight picture I need to have to make that arrow fly within a reasonable distance of my intended point of impact. So that's where we're at. Gracie and I, again, want to thank you so much for being part of our channel once again. I'm going to probably cover in the next episode, we'll go into the hook of the string, which is how the fingers are put on, be it glove or tab, where the hook is onto it, and the position of the hand that goes into it. So we'll go from there into anchor positions and elbow and shoulder alignment. So we'll address the string, we'll draw the bow, and we'll try to get good form covered in next week's episode. Thank you so much again for being here. Hit the subscribe button. We would appreciate a like if you don't mind. And by all means, please leave us some comments so I could better explain anything that you've not understood or anything that you want additional coverage into, and anything else that you would like to cover going into this series. Going to reiterate one more time, this is my journey from becoming a traditional archery beginner into a bow hunter. I'm hoping that you can glean a little bit of information along the way to shorten your journey down. Some of the things that I have already discovered, which may help you go along on your journey to becoming a traditional archer and traditional bow hunter. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time on Ozarks Traditional. Good day.